Hey YouTube, Brian here, back with another video. Today we'll be going over some more replays of my games with Malice, and the theme of today's video is going to be the card responsible for teaching Yu-Gi-Oh players how to count to 5, Nibiru the Primal Being. I'll be showing a variety of replays where I get nibbed at different spots in my combo lines, but still recover without issue. As usual, if you like this type of video and want to see more, let us know in the comments and by liking the video or by joining our Discord. Also, if you have a replay of your own that you'd like to share and get feedback on, stick around until the end of the video to see how you can submit your own. With that, let's get into the replays. So for this first replay, you can see that we've opened a okay hand. It's not ideal to hard open the GWC 06, but we do have Dormouse plus Bistio, which is one of the best starter combos in the deck, as well as an effect veiler should we get interrupted. So I'll start this replay first by setting the GWC, of course, and my opponent calls my bluff and veilers the Dormouse, but that's completely fine because we do have the Bistio to continue extending. So we're going to make Decoder, we're going to make Ransom, and we're going to trigger all the effects that we have, chain blocking, everything, and then going into our SP Little Knight to banish our Red Ransom. And then Red Ransom is going to banish our White Rabbit, and White Rabbit is going to go ahead and set our TB11. Here we're going to link for White Binder and go for the TP11 to banish and summon Chessy Cat from our deck, and our opponent is going to go ahead and drop the Nibiru here. Now the Nibiru here is not bad at all because we already have our GWC 06 and we already have White Binder in rotation, so no matter what on our opponent's turn, we have GWC to summon back Binder to DD Crow something from their graveyard, and then Binder can banish our Red Ransom and our White Rabbit to get more follow-up, and then White Rabbit can set our MTP07 to be another banish as an interruption. And not to mention we still have a Bistio and we have a effect veiler in our hand, so this Nibiru really is not a huge deal here. So opponent is going to give us a Nibiru token, and I'm going to continue extending with my field spell because I actually haven't used my Chessy Cat effect yet. And so I'll use Chessy Cat to summon it back and then use her effect to draw 2. We draw into another effect veiler, which is fantastic in this situation. And then I opt to go ahead and use my Bistio here to end on a Cryptor, and then during the end phase, I'm going to go ahead and use the Cryptor effect to banish the Nibiru. Since this is game 1, I actually don't know what my opponent is playing. For most situations, I'll go ahead and just banish the Nibiru because, of course, I don't want to give my opponent possible free link material, and I don't want the Nibiru to just be like a 3000 body that they can attack with. Now, if I knew my opponent was on something like pure Risio, for instance, I would actually normally keep the Nibiru around, because Nibiru for pure Risio can be kind of a liability. And I hope everyone watching knows that X Risio can only use its effect to search if you control only level 4 or rank 4 monsters. So Nibiru being around means that their X can't actually get its search off. So if I knew that was the matchup, I would actually choose to probably leave the Nibiru around. And you'll see that in a later replay that I'll show. But here, as we pass back to our opponent, we can see that they start their turn with Extravagance, which means that this is very likely going to be Fire King. So our opponent normal summons Ponix, and they use Ponix effect. Now here I have 2 Veilers in my hand, and Veiler against Fire King is always really awkward to use because if they have Kirin in their hand, it can pretty much invalidate any Veilers that you have. And it's basically the same principle as like if you imperm or veiler a Malice normal summon and then they have the chainable trap, it basically invalidates your hand trap. But in this situation, since I have 2 veilers, I can at least guarantee that this Ponix will be negated. And even if I try to like hold them for later points of the combo, like their whole deck is fire, so there's not really a good point in which Kirin won't be able to dodge these veilers. So I figured, you know what, just go ahead and use them now to try and try to cut them off from their stem. And of course they do have the Kirin, but we do have the second Veiler to still negate this Ponix. Now here my opponent, instead of popping the Ponix, since they know it's going to be negated, they opt to pop a Ponix from their hand instead in order to keep this body around and still trigger their Sacred Fire King Garunix. Now, they go for the Garunix effect here, and I go ahead and chain my GWC 06. The reason is because I know that they're probably going to be destroying a copy of another Kirin from their deck. And Kirin will summon a Fire King from their graveyard hand and then destroy a card on the field non-targeting. So if I chain my GWC 06 to their Kirin effect, what will happen is my GWC will resolve first, summoning White Binder, and then their Kirin will resolve to summon a monster and then immediately destroy a card. And since it doesn't target, it can destroy my White Binder, and I won't be able to trigger her because she won't be in the proper location that she has the trigger in. So I have to chain my GWC 06 here so that I at least get my white binder effect off and can banish my names for the MTP 07 as well as any additional follow-up. And of course my opponent does pop the Kieran here, and I chain my white binder to banish the only other target they have to summon back, because Kieran does have to summon something from the grave or hand in order to destroy a card on the field. So I go ahead and banish their Ponyx, putting them on having a Fire King name in their hand, and even if they do, it means that they I have full information afterwards, and I don't have to worry about like any kind of unknown that's in their hand. So I go ahead and also chain my Cryptor here to banish their Sacred Fire King Garunix, just to get rid of that recursion, and then also make sure they can't immediately make their rank 8 after this whole chain resolves. And yeah, so I go ahead and banish my Rabbit and my Red Ransom in order to go grab the MTP 07, and you can see that my opponent here did not have another Fire King name to summon off the Kieran, which means they also don't get to destroy anything. And so from here, it's very hard for them to win, because once I get MTP 07 online, no matter what they link into, they really don't have any way to clear my whole board and then also play through the follow-up that I'm going to add. And so my opponent just concedes here. So in this replay, you can see that we've once again opened an okay hand. We've again opened GWC 06, which is not great, but we do have Dormouse as well as a Terraforming as an extender, and then Ash if our combo gets negated, as well as to stop any Molcharmies our opponent might have. So to start my turn, I'm going to set and I'm going to normal summon my Chessie Cat. Now, starting with Chessie instead of Dormouse can be risky sometimes, because Chessie loses to one more hand trap than Dormouse does, which is Ash. And so if I didn't already have an extender in the Terraforming here, I might just start with the Dormouse instead, just so I lose to less hand traps from my opponent's hand. But since I do have the Terraforming as the extender here, even if my opponent ashes my Chessie, I can continue to play, so I'm not too worried about my Chessie getting stopped. So I use my Chessie effect, and we can see that our opponent actually doesn't have the Ash to stop it, and I banish my Dormouse, and I draw 2 additional cards. They're not great. I draw another Underground and also another Dormouse, which doesn't do anything in this situation. But it's fine because we can just keep going with our Dormouse, use Dormouse to banish White Rabbit, and then use White Rabbit to go ahead and set our TB11. And then here I go into Decoder, go into Ransom, go through the standard line and search another copy of the field spell, and then go into my Little Knight to banish my Red Ransom. And my opponent here is going to go ahead and use their Nibiru on the Little Knight, which in my opinion is not the best place to use the Nibiru, as I'll go ahead and show here. So they give us a Nib token, but the Red Ransom will still trigger and still banish a copy of Chessie Cat from the deck. And then we can use those two to go ahead and make the Splash Mage. Since my opponent has already used Nibiru, I'm not really afraid of what else they can have in their hand. And so I go ahead and go for Splash Mage, summon back the Chessie, go for the White Binder, and then we're going to use White Binder effect to banish a few names as fodder for a Cryptor later on, and then we're going to use our TB11 to banish our White Binder, summon our just any name, and then White Binder will go ahead and just set back the TB11. Now, some people might be confused why I don't just go for the MTP07 here, because obviously setting the TB11 doesn't do a whole lot, since we've already gotten access to all of our names and we don't really need it. But the reason I opt to set the TB11 again instead of setting the MTP07 is because I do this to play around like back row removal, because if you set the MTP07 off of the White Binder, it kind of leaves it vulnerable to something like a Harpy's Feather Duster. And I find that it's much better to have the MTP07 be kind of like a layered interruption, where it's not present on the board until you actually go for your White Binder to banish your White Rabbit and your White Rabbit to set your MTP07. That way, even if your opponent does do something like Feather Duster you, even after the fact, you can still set the MTP07 and not lose it to some kind of back row removal. So even though in this situation, my opponent can't play anything like Lightning Storm, for instance, so it's pretty much just Harpy's Feather Duster, I still do that just kind of out of habit, just out of muscle memory, just because I think it's better to have your interruption layered that way. But anyway, so I'll go ahead and make the Cryptor here, and then I'm going to use my field spell And then I'll set the terraforming as a bluff since it really doesn't do anything for me here. We've already gone through almost every copy of our field spell. And so, yeah, just set it as a bluff and then I'll pass turn to my opponent. Now, this is actually, I believe, a post-side game. So I actually do know my opponent is on Risio, which, as I told everyone in the last replay, when I know I'm against pure Risio, I just leave the Nibiru for them so that they can't get value off of their X effect. So here my opponent, they're going to go battle phase, hoping that they can bait out my Cryptor effect. But if you guys have watched my my combo video, you'll know that it doesn't matter if Cryptor gets outed here. Like I am not incentivized to protect my Cryptor at all, because my Cryptor can just come back later on by banishing it with a white binder. So here my opponent attacks with the Cryptor. They've effectively wasted their battle phase, so now I don't have to worry about dying this turn. And in their main phase 2, they go ahead and normal summon Ice, and I'll go ahead and Ash that. And because I know that X is not really an extender for them here, I'm going to try to keep them off of Risio names on their field and in their grave, so that Sword is no longer an extender for them. So here I go ahead and Ash the Ice, and I go ahead and go for the GWC06, and I banish a bunch of my names so that they all come back. So everything comes back, and then I search for follow-up with Red Ransom, and I use my Rabbit to go ahead and set MTP07. And I go ahead and use the MTP07 here to banish the Ice Risio. And if you guys watch my previous videos, you know that I would prefer to banish the white binder here so that I get an additional draw. But actually, since this was 4 summons, normally I would only do that if the white binder summon would be the 4th summon. But since this is 4 summons already, I don't want to play into another nib on my opponent's turn, and so I just go ahead and banish the white rabbit here so that I don't summon a 5th time into a possible Nibiru. Now, if I was planning to do that, I should have summoned this red ransom right here so that it points to the white binder and still inverts my opponent's monster's attack and defense. But that's not really a huge deal because they've already gone through their battle phase, which means inverting their attack and defense doesn't really matter. So I go ahead and search and banish the Ice here. And my opponent is just going to concede because what will happen is, even if they have the X to put another name on the field, I can just go ahead and Cryptor banish the X, and they would then not have a name for Sword again. So then Sword would not become an extender. They would need to have a second Ice to send this Nibiru, or they need to have hard drawn Node to summon off of whatever they send with X. And even if they do, like I said, they've gone through their battle phase, so they can't threaten my life total. I still have all the follow-up in my hand. I still have Druiswarm in case they try to go for like Eclipse Twin plays. There's just really no way for my opponent to get out of this. So for this replay, you can see that I'm actually going up against Brendan, one of my teammates, as we were playtesting for the 3v3 Team YCS in Las Vegas. And this opening hand, you can see, is pretty good. We have a name plus a Bestial, as well as Gold Sark and a additional Bestial as an extender, and then Valor if we were to get stopped in our combo. So our opponent is going to start by Perulia-ing us, and I'm not too worried because we do have the Gold Sark to prevent our opponent from getting a single draw, assuming this resolves, which our opponent does have an Imperm to stop the Chessie, which means unfortunately I do have to give them one draw to normal summon the Stormhouse. But I normal summon the Dormouse, and then I banish the Rabbit, and then use Rabbit effect to go ahead and set GWC06 from the deck. I've been doing this a lot more, which is setting GWC06 first instead of TB11. In most cases, they both play around Nibiru pretty well, but setting the GWC06 first kind of is a bit safer, so that it just gets it into rotation much earlier. And then here I go ahead and link for the Decoder and then the Ransom, and I go through the standard lines, making the SP here to banish the Ransom in order to play around Nibiru. And my opponent is going to go ahead and Nibiru here, all going according to plan because I will go ahead and SP banish herself and Red Ransom. And then I'll go ahead and play the field spell as well, just to banish a name for Cryptor when I make her later in the game. But also because the effect to make my opponent attack only Malice Link monsters is very relevant here, since if you remember this lock from my combo tutorial, Red Ransom will invert the stats of this Nibiru so that it can't actually threaten anything on my field. And no matter what they play, SP here will always represent pretty much 2 banishes. So here, pass it back to my opponent, and my opponent is going to go ahead and start by using Bonfire to grab X. I'm not too worried about this because, as I mentioned in previous replays, this X here isn't really an extender because this Nibiru is currently preventing it from using its effect to search. So But what that does tip me off is that my opponent probably has an ice in their hand, which of course they do. So they normal summon the ice, and I'm going to go ahead and try to keep them off of Risio bodies here, just to kind of invalidate any extenders they have in their hand. And I know that since they didn't drop like too many hand traps on me, their hand is probably more heavy on the engine side of things. So I go ahead and SP the ice and also Valor it so they don't get the additional body, and then I use my Red Ransom to grab follow-up, and then White Rabbit to go ahead and grab my MTP-07. And here my opponent is going to use Tactics. Now I kind of have two different lines of play here. So one thing I can do is I can go ahead and flip this MTP-07 to banish their Nibiru, and then they're going to steal something from me, but it doesn't really matter what they steal, because whatever they steal still won't turn their X to online. Now if they steal something like the Nibiru token, for instance, they can always just go into the battle phase, crash it, and then now their X is live. But I do figure that the other play I can do is, if they opt to steal the Red Ransom here, they do still have to get rid of her in order to turn on the X effect. And when they get rid of her, I can always just bring Red Ransom back with GWC06 and then still have my MTP-07 be online anyway. So since we were just testing, I opted to go for the line where I let him take it just to see where this line would go. And he goes for the Lizard to clear his field so that his X is live, and then he go ahead and summons his X. Now he dumps a Risio name here instead of dumping Eclipse Twins or Aggregator, so that even if I go MTP-07 banish this X, he's still able to summon this sword that he's going to search off the X. He's going to search the node, which clues me in that he has a sword in his hand, and that he's going to be able to summon it even if I banish this X, because he already has a Risio name in the grave. So here I opt to not use my MTP-07 and just hold it, and of course he does have the sword here, and then sword is going to search for another copy of ice. So in this moment, I know that he has ice and node in his hand, as well as one unknown. And even if I go MTP to banish one of his names here, he can still continue to play either by summoning the node or by summoning the ice by discarding like the last card in his hand. And so I opt to just not use it here, because I actually am not too afraid of getting Exciton Knighted, since if he does Exciton me, it means I take no battle damage for the rest of the turn, effectively blanking his battle phase. And as long as I survive to the next turn, I'm in a very good position to still win, just because I have two Bystials in my hand as well as a Underground for follow-up. And then since MTP-07 will go ahead and search me another name as well. So I almost want him to Exciton me, just so then I don't take any more damage for the rest of the turn. So that's exactly what's going to happen as my opponent makes Exciton, and I'll go ahead and use the 07 to search follow-up and just keep him off of just more bodies. And then I'll also use the 06 to gain some life points and turn on this 07. So they're going to destroy my whole board, but that's completely fine. And then my opponent is going to play a copy of Hard Drawn Cross, which is actually kind of annoying in this situation. But it doesn't really matter because of just all the follow-up I have in my hand. And my opponent is going to go for the cross draw here, and he does make a misplay because he forgot that this Exciton Knight was actually banished instead of sent to grave. And so he shuffles his detonator back, forgetting that means that the node in his hand is now not live. And so that basically means he has no plays left. But even if he tries to go for the node, it won't really matter because I have, like I said, two Bystials that can threaten whatever he makes. Because as long as I summon the Druisworm and the Baldrake, even if he makes something like Duo Drive, I can use Baldrake to tribute the Druisworm to banish the Duo Drive. And even if he negates with Cross, the Druisworm effect will trigger in the grave to still send the Duo Drive to the graveyard. And that'll happen for no matter what rank 4 he makes here, unless it's something like Baguska. But like even with Baguska, I just link off the Druisworm next turn, send his Baguska to grave, and then I have all the follow-up I need. So yeah, this is not really a winnable situation for Brendan here, even if he did misplay towards the end. So with this replay, you can see that we've once again opened a pretty good hand. We have our Malice name plus Bystial combo, as well as 2 hand traps to help us insulate from interruptions our opponent might have, and then Ash, of course, will negate any Charmies in case our opponent throws that at us. But to start my combo, I'm going to use my Dormouse effect, which will get Veilored. Makes a lot of sense. And then I'm going to use the Bystial to go ahead and extend through that, and go into Decoder, go into Ransom, trigger all my effects, and of course going to SP to banish the ransom, pretty standard line stuff. And then with the ransom, I'm going to banish the White Rabbit, go ahead and set the GWC 06, and then go into a binder afterwards. Now I'm not doing the exact combo line in my combo tutorial because our Dormouse did get Veilered, but it's still fine. We can still get to basically the same spot just by doing some small variations. So here I'm going to go ahead and flip the TB11, banishing my White Binder to go ahead and summon Chessie Cat from the deck. And then as I use my White Binder effect, my opponent reveals that they had a second hand trap in the Ash Blossom. So pretty smart of them to hold it until the White Binder, because otherwise it wouldn't really have gotten that much value for them if they negated this TB11, for instance. But in this case, we can still keep playing, so I go ahead and make the Splash Mage here. And my opponent opts to Nibiru on the Splash Mage, which, if you ask me, like, it's better to just wait until after the Splash Mage effect. That way I'm actually locked into Cybers. Not like it really matters, because locking into Cybers has no effect on the outcome of my board, really. So they're going to Nibiru the Splash Mage here. Held that Nibiru for a very long time. And I think they may have forgotten that I still have this Underground in my hand, and I have also not used my Chessie Cat effect. So I'm going to go ahead and use Underground, banish my Chessie Cat, and then summon my Chessie Cat back, and then go ahead and link into a Masquerena here. Masquerena is going to translate into most likely a Cryptor on my opponent's turn, or sometimes it could translate into a Firewall Dragon. Kind of depends on the situation of the board. But in any case, if you look at this Masquerena as a copy of Cryptor, we've ended on Cryptor GWC through 3 hand traps. So pretty impressive if I would say so myself. And then here my opponent is going to go straight for the battle phase to threaten my Masquerena, which is completely fine with me because we can just flip our GWC 06, use our White Binder, banish our Red Ransom, banish our White Rabbit, and then Ransom will search us a follow-up, White Rabbit will search us MTP 07 for another interruption. And then my opponent here fails to realize that his Nibiru has had his attack and defense swapped, and so he's going to, and since he's forced to attack into my Link monsters, he's going to try and attack over the White Binder, and taking 17 damage, killing his own Nibiru, realizing that he cannot play through 2 more non-targeting banishes as well as an Ash and a Nibiru. He's just going to go ahead and scoop here. So in this replay, you can see that we've opened a really good hand. We've opened Dormouse plus a Bestial as well as 3 different hand traps in case our opponent tries to stop our combo. So here I'm going to normal summon Dormouse, use Dormouse effect. Our opponent is going to imperm the Dormouse, which is totally fine. We can go ahead and extend with our Bestial, just like our prior replays. But in this replay, you can see that our opponent has actually sided into Meows. Thankfully, we do have the Ash to stop the Meows, which means our opponent will not be getting any additional draws. And I'm just going to go into Decoder, go into Ransom, do our usual combo of SP to banish the Ransom, and then Ransom to banish our Red Rabbit. Now here I'm going to use White Rabbit to set GWC, and then I'm going to go ahead and link into White Binder. And here, since our Dormouse did get impermed, I can't do the line where we make Firewall and then Firewall to bounce 2 cards from our graveyard back to our hand. Because I'm missing a body here, so I can't just link White Binder and a body into Firewall and then Underground banish White Binder from the grave to co-link the Firewall twice, because and that would be really good if I could, because then I could add back both Magma and my Ash Blossom, and then use my Ash Blossom again on my opponent's turn. But since I can't do that line exactly, I opt to instead go for the modified line, and I use TB11 here to go ahead and banish my White Binder, summon the White Binder back, go ahead and go for a draw 1. Now I see that I do draw a Malice name off of this draw, so I opt to go for kind of a greedier line here instead of like kind of playing it a bit more conservative, just because I saw my opponent had 2 hand traps, so you know, what are the chances they have a 3rd one, right? So use my Binder effect here, banish a couple names to fuel Cryptor, and then go ahead and link into Firewall. And then here I just use Firewall effect. Since I can't get the other co-link, I'm just going to go ahead and add back the Magma, since Magma is higher value than the Ash Blossom here, as it'll add me a second Bestial at the end of my turn. So go ahead and use Magma to banish my Chessie Cat here. And my intent was to go for a Cryptor plus a ball line, where I could link all 3 of these into a Cryptor and then use Firewall effect, summon this cat out of my hand, and then link the Firewall and the cat into a Cerberus, and then link the 2 of them into an Abal. But as you'll see here, my opponent punishes my greedy line by Nibiruing me there. Pretty good of them to hold on to that, honestly. But as I've mentioned so many times before, it doesn't really matter once we have our GWC and White Binder set up, because it means on our opponent's turn we have our full setup combo anyway. So here I still play the Underground just to have it online and have the effect to make my opponent attack my Link monsters online. And since I'll be searching one off of Red Ransom during my opponent's turn anyway, I might as well just play it even if I don't banish anything, since I've already used all my names. During the end phase, I'm going to grab a Baldrake here, which will serve as another interruption. And during my opponent's turn here, so this is post side, and I know my opponent is on Fiendsmith Risio. So I go ahead and flip the GWC06 in the standby phase because I want to use this Droll in my hand at the earliest possible opportunity. And one thing that you guys might have run into as you play Malice is you'll realize that Droll and MTP07 have a little bit of counter synergy because MTP07 has to add from deck to hand in order to banish a card on the field. And so if you are under Droll and Lockbird, you actually cannot activate MTP07. So here, since I know my opponent is on Risio and they're likely going to start their turn with like Summon X or normal Summon Ice or whatever, I want to be able to immediately respond with Droll without cutting off my own MTP07. So I just flip the GWC06 early so that I can go ahead and get my MTP07 set up, and that way when I Droll them, I can just go ahead and use my MTP07 to both add follow-up and to make it harder for them to extend through this board. So of course my opponent does lead with Ice, and then he goes Ice to summon Sword, and then Sword to search for X. Of course I drop the Droll here, and then I also chain the MTP07 just to banish one of the names so that they can't immediately go into Exciton Knight. Now my opponent does Ash the MTP07 here, which is unfortunate, but it's still fine because even if my opponent Excitons here, they have an X in their hand that can't search because they're under Droll. And I still have this this Baldrake and this Nibiru in my hand to recover from getting Exciton. So yeah, not really a big issue for me. They go into Moon and then go into Requiem, and then Requiem to go ahead and grab Lacrima from the deck, and then Lacrima to dump Engraver. And as they try to use the Engraver effect, I go ahead and Baldrake it, just so they don't have an opportunity to make something like a Chaos Angel. That would make it a little bit annoying to deal with, even though like we can just reset our MTP07 to deal with it next turn. Just rather not let him get to that point. And then making this Baldrake also makes it so that if they go for a duo drive with these two level 4s, I can just easily banish it. And my opponent realizes that, okay, well, the X in his hand no longer is an extender. Whatever rank 4 he makes is going to get banished by the Baldrake, and he's just not going to win from this position. So coming into this last replay, you can see that this is actually a post-side match with the mirror, as evidenced by this artifact Lancea here. But I'll go ahead and spoil the ending for everyone. We don't even end up using this artifact Lancea, so really it could have been a Blue Eyes White Dragon and nothing would have changed. But as for the rest of the hand, it looks fantastic. We have the Dormouse plus Bestial combo, as well as the Underground as an extender, and an Ash to stop any Charmies that may be thrown our way. So I'm going to start with Dormouse, banish White Rabbit, and then White Rabbit to go ahead and set the GWC06. And then go for the standard line, linking for Decoder, summoning Serenir, summoning Red Ransom, and then doing everything in chain. And going to go ahead and also make the SP, banishing the Ransom, and then Ransom banishing the Cat. I'm reserving the Dormouse effect here to respond if my opponent has any kind of further interruption. And the Cat here is going to go ahead and draw us 2, and then I'm going to go into Binder and banish a couple names for Cryptor later on. I don't banish the Mouse here, again, just because I want to reserve it in case my opponent interrupts me, and then I can use Dormouse as an additional extender later on. So I'll go ahead and set the TB11, use TB11 to banish the White Binder, and then summon another Dormouse from the deck, and then White Binder to go ahead and draw a card. My opponent is going to Nibiru here, which is an alright Nibiru, but as I've said time and time again, the moment I get GWC and White Binder into rotation, Nibiru no longer matters at all. So even though they tribute my whole board, that's completely fine. We have all the setup we need, and since we saved our Dormouse effect earlier, I can go ahead and play the Underground, banish my Dormouse, and then just link into an IP Masquerena, which will translate into a copy of Cryptor on the next turn. Now, those of you who watched my first place Seattle regional deck profile will know that I did not play Masquerena in that profile. I have since added her to the extra deck, and I just think that she's a very good insurance for situations where your opponent has exactly Imperm plus Nibiru, and she has been pretty good in that regard. But yeah, an update. I might do an updated deck profile soon, but I'm honestly just waiting to see how the ban list will shake out, because that should be coming pretty soon. Fingers crossed. And I will make more videos once the ban list drops regarding the new version of the deck. But in any case, I'm going to go ahead and pass back to my opponent, and my opponent go ahead and then drew a Swarms during my end phase, banishing this White Binder, which is not a big deal at all because we can still summon from banished using GWC06. So during the standby phase, I'm going to go ahead and just flip the GWC06 to get my whole setup, because I want to banish this Druid Swarm before my opponent can get any value out of it. I don't want him to like make a Link 2 and then use Druid Swarm to force out my Masquerena. I want to use my Masquerena as late as possible whenever it is convenient for me. And so I just go ahead and get my setup, get my MTP07, and, and I'm going to go ahead and just banish the Druid Swarm here. Looking at our hand, it's pretty insane. We have 7 cards in hand, including Nibiru and Lancea and Ash. And this White Binder is going to draw us a second Nibiru, which is super overkill. But yeah, our opponent is going to go straight to the battle. And I'm obviously not going to use the Masquerena here since my monsters are all protected. But they do reveal that they had a second Druid Swarm in their hand, which is, I think, a pretty heads-up play by them, because they know that if they go straight to battle, I'm definitely not going to use Masquerena. So if they Bestial during the battle phase, that's like one way they can kind of sneak past this Masquerena and get in damage that way. Because even if this Druid Swarm's attack and defense are going to be swapped, which means it only has 2000 attack, so they can run the Druid Swarm into one of my Link monsters and then just use the Druid Swarm to send Masquerena during the battle phase. So honestly, kind of a heads up play by my opponent, but unfortunately for them, I have the Baldrake in my hand to go ahead and banish their Druid Swarm target. And that'll make it so that the Druid Swarm is stuck in their hand now, and then this Baldrake also acts as another interruption for any plays my opponent is going to try. Now they're going to try and go for a thrust here. Thankfully I have the Ash for it. And then my opponent is going to then normal summon White Rabbit, and White Rabbit set their TB11. Now I'm not threatened by this board at all because obviously I've already used my traps, so I don't care about Lingaribo. And my opponent cannot make any Link 2 here that really plays through Baldrake and IP into Cryptor. So I just let my opponent play. They extend with Underground, and then Underground will summon their Dormouse. Now here, since I don't want them to make their Malice Link 3, I'm going to go ahead and fire my Masquerena to make my Cryptor, and then I'm going to go ahead and use Cryptor effect to banish this Dormouse so that they can't get additional names online. Now, at this point we have full information. We know that this card in our opponent's hand is the Druid Swarm that they were not able to summon, and we know that the set card is TP11, which is not really going to get them anywhere. So they go ahead and make the Lingaribo, I think, in order to try and make an SP, but since I know that now their TB11 is pretty much dead, I'm just going to use my Baldrake, banish this Lingaribo, so they have no plays remaining, and then they just go ahead and concede. No Lancea needed, no Nibiru needed, just well-timed interaction with your opponent, and yeah, that's how you do it. So that's going to be it for the replays today. As I mentioned at the start of the video, we're going to start taking viewer-submitted replays for future gameplay review videos. To submit a replay, you just have to join our Discord and make a post in our replay submission channel. And for now, we will only be taking replays from either Dueling Book or Yu-Gi-Oh! Omega, so if you submit a replay on anything else, it will not be looked at. If you're not sure how to share a replay from Omega, simply go to your replay list, select the replay you want to share, click export, and it will copy the replay to your clipboard. All you have to do then is just paste that into the channel. Now, not every replay that is submitted will be reviewed. We'll only be reviewing replays if there is something worth reviewing about the game, or if helpful feedback can be given. So please limit your submissions to just those that you think could have gone differently if played in just a different way. Thanks to everyone for watching. See you all next time.